This is your Friday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Hope everybody's having a good one out there. Got a little snow here. That's not so bad, though. Kind of looks nice out there right now. Enjoying a little bit of that on a Friday. We've got Mark Craig coming up on the show here in just a little while to talk NFL picks and to talk Vikings. Mark's been doing this for a long time, has seen a lot of different coaching searches, has seen how the league plays out, and I got his perspectives on kind of what direction he thinks the Vikings will go, and got his thoughts on what he thought Monday when the Vikings did make the moves to fire Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman. So good conversation with Mark Craig. That'll be in just a little while here. Some good Minnesota hockey news on a couple different fronts. And I think we need to talk a little Vikings free agency too. Yeah, some big decisions for the new general manager and head coach whenever those two are hired. But first, what did I miss? Timberwolves played the Grizzlies on Thursday night, lost 116-108. Grizzlies been one of the hottest teams in the NBA since right around Thanksgiving. I think they're 21-4 since then. They had been struggling. Ja Morant got hurt, and then all of a sudden they took off. Ja Morant is back. They're still rolling. The game kind of underscored a few things that will be hopefully nicely tied together here. One, Memphis's roster is an interesting mix of young and established role players. One of the reasons they are in the position they're in right now is three of their best players are still on their young rookie deals. Talking about Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson. Jaren Jackson starts to get more expensive next season when an extension kicks in, but Ja Morant and Desmond Bane still cost controlled for a few more years here. So you look at Memphis, they're in a pretty enviable position right now. They have the 29th highest payroll in the league right now, according to Hoops Hype, but they are looking like they are one of the top teams in the West right now because of that kind of sweet spot of role players and emerging young talent. The Wolves kind of in that same position. The difference with them right now is that of their three best players, two of them are very highly paid right now because they are on those second contracts, Karl-Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell, making a neighborhood of $30 million apiece this year, pushing the Wolves' payroll much higher than Memphis's this year. Wolves more middle of the pack, a good $20 million more than Memphis this season, in large part because of that. And a lot of their role players right now are younger players who they are leaning on to fill key minutes. Guys like Naz Reid, guys like Jaden McDaniels, before he got hurt, Jalen Noel, Jared Vanderbilt, guys like that. They are counting on to kind of fill out the roster. Memphis doing it kind of the other way, and that's probably the preferable way to do it, right? If you have your best players not taking up a huge part of your cap, then you can build a better foundation around them a little more easily. And I think that's what we saw in the game on Thursday night. The Wolves the big three were great. Anthony Edwards, Karl-Anthony Towns, D'Angelo Russell all played really well. I think they combined for more than 80 points in the game, but that still wasn't enough in this case because the Wolves just did not get enough from their supporting cast in that game. And sometimes it's different. Sometimes the Wolves do get enough from them, but it kind of shows how top-heavy their roster can be, especially when they play some of these better teams. Memphis getting contributions all up and down the lineup in that game. Morant, Jackson, and Bane were their three leading scorers, but they combined for 57 points. Two other players in double figures. 7 total players aside from those big three had at least 5 points. Wolves had one other player outside their big three. Jared Vanderbilt had at least 5 points in that game. Wolves were kind of I wouldn't say in control of that game, but they were up 7 at halftime. They were kind of in good shape, and then Memphis just kind of wore them down and took over in the second half, especially that third quarter where Memphis outscored Minnesota 37-24. So if you're talking about how the Wolves can get to be where Memphis is now, 30-14 as opposed to 20-22, it is going to be those role players, but it's going to be difficult because of how much cap space is taken up by Karl-Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell. The game itself, I think the Wolves are getting close. They played well. No shame losing at Memphis. Again, Memphis one of the hottest teams, but just kind of speaks to how much better can this get, and that speaks to Chris Hines' story from Friday's paper, FridayStarTribune.com, talking to Sachin Gupta, who's in charge of personnel right now in the wake of Gerson Rosas being fired right before the season started, talking about the Wolves being buyers more than sellers at the trade deadline. That feels appropriate. I mean, they're in the mix certainly for a play-in spot and maybe even perhaps for a top 6 spot in the West if things turn a certain way. If they we're thinking they were going to be more seller mode, thinking about, the future a little bit more. Guys like Patrick Beverley could be, guys that they would want to move, but a guy like Patrick Beverley is going to be very important down the stretch. So if you're a Wolves fan, good to hear from them that they're thinking about adding to the roster, not subtracting from it. That said, again, tricky because they're pressed right up against that salary cap, right up against the luxury tax threshold. What can they really do to make a not just a short-sighted move, but a long-term move that's going to help now and into the future, without kind of wrecking any flexibility they might want to have down the road. So tricky proposition for Sachin Gupta and the Wolves to try to add to this roster in any kind of meaningful way. And I guess that gets to my final point on all this, which is, the Wolves did have this kind of young player setup, and that brings me to a question from a listener that came in about a couple days ago. Nick Hansen said, "I know Viking stock is going to take a lot of oxygen this week, but would love to have some Wolves what-ifs. I know this ground has been tread a lot before, and some of it is a moot point with Jimmy Butler long gone and D'Angelo Russell finally showing some potential. Thought it was worth a relook after I listened to No Dunks the other day." That's the podcast with J.E. Skeets. He was on the podcast here a couple months ago, and a lot of those other Skeets buddies that are so good at the basketball podcasting said they were discussing all-star picks. Both Andrew Wiggins and Zach LaVine, as well as Karl-Anthony Towns, were in the mix for selections. Nick wants to know, would Wiggins have worked under Finch? What would a big 3 or big 4 of Towns, Wiggins, LaVine, and Edwards have looked like? Food for thought. Keep up the good work, Nick. Thanks, Nick, for the kind words and the question. That is a big what if because we never really fully got to see what might have happened with with Towns, Wiggins, and LaVine had they been allowed to get a little bit older. I mean, you'll remember that they improved from 16 wins in Wiggins' rookie season to 29 wins the next year when Towns was a rookie. Wiggins and LaVine, second-year players that year. Tom Thibodeau comes in 2016-17. They're 19-31 when Zach LaVine tears his ACL, kind of middle towards the end of that season. Of course, LaVine is traded in the offseason as part of the Jimmy Butler trade. Wolves win 47 games the next year, but everything falls apart not long after that. So the question is, if they had kept that core together, what might have happened? The Edwards what-if in that we probably need to erase because I think that team would have been good enough, certainly, that they would not have been in a position to draft Anthony Edwards, and that would have been a roster redundancy to a certain point anyway, with LaVine and Wiggins already on the roster as your starting wings. Would Wiggins have fit here under Finch? Maybe better than he did in other systems. I think that's fair to say. But I think that the Russell stuff this year maybe eases some of that question a little bit. LaVine taking off has certainly been a big deal. He's having a great year with Chicago. Chicago looks like they're turning a corner to a certain degree. We'll see how that plays out in the second half of the year. But LaVine always felt to me like the big what if, and I lobbied that they should be trading Wiggins, not LaVine, in that Butler deal. And Wiggins, LaVine tearing his ACL complicated things a lot because Chicago was in a rebuild. They could afford to do that. The Wolves didn't want to give up a player that could help them after they added Butler, but it always felt like LaVine had a bigger upside than Wiggins did. So I think long story short is it would have been fun to see how that group got better together, but I also don't know if they would have been good enough to justify the salaries that they would have commanded not too long after that, because, had they played that out and, kept Levine, kept Wiggins, kept everybody intact, Levine and Wiggins would have been eligible for extensions around the same time. Would that have been a big three that you were willing to pay big money to starting, not too long after that third season of Wiggins and Levine? So I think ultimately it played out fine for the Wolves, certainly played out well for the Bulls at this point, and Wiggins is having a good, solid season with the Warriors. I think some of that is a little bit overhyped and overinflated, but he has certainly found a good role with them. Doesn't have to be the superstar there, obviously. So a good what if, but also a reminder that, these things don't exist in a vacuum. You'd have to pay all those guys, and would that have been worth it with that core? I don't think so.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake for 24/7 gaming, fun restaurants and bars, and luxurious hotel rooms. And join Club M to bask in the rewards. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
Happy to welcome Mark Craig on the show now. Mark's been a weekly guest most Fridays talking NFL picks, and I want to get his thoughts as well on everything that's happened Vikings this week. Mark, how you doing?
Doing well. I'm surprised you're having me back on after I guaranteed a lot that the Colts would beat the Jaguars. The easiest play-in game in the history of the NFL playoffs, and they made me look like an idiot.
Well, and they didn't exactly sit well with Colts brass. I don't know if you saw the quote today from, was it their GM? Is it Chris Ballard, their GM, saying basically talking about Carson Wentz, and didn't have a lot of good things to say about his future with the team.
Yeah, I mean, who'd have thought that Jalen Hurts, that the Eagles would have made the playoffs the first year that this happened, and that the Colts with that great running game would be the ones on the outside. It's that's the most disappointing season right there is probably the Colts.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most disappointing seasons, I suppose, too, could have been the Vikings, and it certainly seemed that way from the perspective of the Wilf family making the decision Monday to fire not only head coach Mike Zimmer, but general manager Rick Spielman as well. You've been around both those guys for a long time. What, as you sifted through the news Monday morning, what was your reaction to it?
Yeah, I mean, I like both guys. I got along with Zimmer, got along with Spielman, but and I think they would even tell you this in all honesty. They had every opportunity. They were given, everything necessary to win by the Wilfs, especially Spielman, and they just didn't get the job done. All these coaching jobs have a certain shelf life, and Zimmer probably the fact that he would make the playoffs and not make the playoffs and back and forth, it kept him here longer than it had he just put all those losses at the beginning. But they had their chance, and it is time for a new voice. And I have a strong feeling it's going to be a opposite voice in every way imaginable who's coming in here.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, we've, Patrick Royce and I have talked often about the rule of opposites that happens a lot in coaching circles and general manager circles. Spielman had been here for a long time. Zimmer was here for 8 years and was more of a veteran, 65 years old now, kind of a little bit of an old school mentality. Bill Parcells, one of his mentors, so you can kind of take it from there. As you think about not necessarily specific candidates, because we've started to see, a pretty good list of general manager candidates, at least so far, emerging. But as you think about the type of person they might eventually hire for both of those jobs, what comes to mind for you?
Well, what comes to mind is a specific person. It's Kellen Mond. I always want to call him, or Kellen Moore.
Kellen Moore, not Kellen Mond. That would be an outside the box hire. That would be an outside the box. That would just be like a showing up Mike Zimmer hire. Just kidding.
I mean, you're talking about and this is he's a rising star. He's going to be. I don't know him personally, so to me, it's like we base this on kind of what results and rankings and general feelings, but like if I'm the Steelers, I'm sitting there in 2007 and Mike Tomlin comes through the door. Just our little bit of experience with Mike Tomlin, I could see him blowing him away. I don't know if Kellen Moore has that, But if he does, to me, he's a guy that's, the Cowboys, not only are they the top ranked in points and yards, but they're balanced, they're creative. The guy survived a coaching change with an offensive coach coming in and, he's still calling the plays. I think there's probably something special about this guy. And if it's not him, it's someone like that. It's, I joked it's going to be someone that, is the Lord's Prayer starts with Sean McVay, and it's going to be offensive. He's going to be, probably player friendly, media friendly. And I think I've heard Royce a couple of times, allude to that. And I'm 100%. I mean, that just having lived it, even going back to growing up with the Browns when they would change coaches, it was always, a Forrest Gregg, this gruff former player to Sam Rutigliano, media darling and the, players coach, and then Marty Schottenheimer. It's just kind of like, and we've seen that with the Vikings, how they've done it. So, yeah, I would think I'd be shocked if it's a defensive guy. I'd be totally shocked if he's in his 60s or 50s, late 50s. I just feel like whenever you stick with a voice this long and it doesn't work out, I think you are searching for a different voice.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. And it probably also makes sense when you think about where this team is. And, frankly, the defense has probably been the more disappointing side of the ball those last couple of years. And, some of their better, younger players are on offense right now, especially if we're talking about a guy like Justin Jefferson, who could be a pretty attractive kind of showpiece for an offensive coach coming in. I think once the Vikings made their news on Monday, there's been a couple more openings even since then in the coaching ranks with the Giants and now the Texans, I believe today, on Thursday, firing their head coach. So that's 8 head coaching jobs out there. And I think, we had Ben Gessling talked on Access Vikings Wednesday about how, in a lot of circles, the Vikings job is considered the most attractive one or one of the most attractive openings. Do you see it that way? Do you see like this is a premium destination for, a general manager and a coach?
Yeah, I think it all depends on what the person feels about. How do you feel about Kirk Cousins? And how do you feel about Kirk Cousins at not only the price he's at now, are you able, I would imagine that he doesn't go in with a $45 million cap hit but if he doesn't do that, then you're tying yourself to him longer. This guy, I always say that, Kirk is not as bad as the people who hate him think, he is, and he's not as good as the people that love him. He's in the middle. I've written over the years good Cousins stories, bad Cousins stories, because he is an up and down player, and he played a role in these two guys getting fired. I mean, they put all their trust in this. I'm not saying that he's the reason that they missed the playoffs 2 years in a row, but he's also not the reason that he didn't save them, like a lot of quarterbacks making that kind of money do. So it depends on what you think of Kirk Cousins. If you think Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields didn't do himself any favors this year, I think Justin Fields will be a really good player, but he certainly had a terrible rookie season. So to me, do you want to go the young, cheap, up and coming quarterback, or do you want to go Kirk Cousins? And so I do believe I will agree with him in that getting the time to do things, the resources, facilities, everything, the Wilfs are as good as any that they're going to find. Now it's just a matter. A lot of times these guys make their decisions based on the quarterback, and you can win with Kirk, but can you win big with him?
That's a good question. They didn't win big enough this year. 14 teams made the playoffs. 12 of them will be playing this weekend in Super Wild Card Weekend. You picked all of those games, and they're all obviously big. Now, maybe we can start with Saturday's games, Raiders at Bengals, and I believe the other one is New England and Buffalo. A couple interesting games. I think I have a disagreement with you on the first pick, but talk me through Raiders, Bengals as you see it.
Yeah, I mean, I like – there's going to be upsets. I mean, like last year, they're on super wild card weekend. We got to make sure we get the super in there. 4 of the lower seeds won. I mean, the only higher seeds that won were the 2s. So both 3s lost, both 4s lost. Now I don't know that, Brady going to Washington and winning was an upset, but still the lower teams, lower seeds won. We're going to see that. And I see a lot of With the Bengals, they played them, and it was
32-13.
32-13. Vegas, their running game their run defense has really improved. They're the hottest team coming in. The Bengals, it's that momentum situation as well. The Bengals, resting last week and having to come back, and the Raiders had their foot to the floor to get into the playoffs. Now, granted, the Bengals are a talented team. They should win. They're at home, but I just get a sense of this is an upset that's probably going to happen.
You could certainly be right. I just feel like I'm not impressed with the Raiders. I think they've overachieved to a large degree even to get to this point. I think the Bengals win this one by a couple touchdowns, but we will see. That's why they play the games, Mark Craig, and the more interesting game probably is Bills-Patriots, two teams that saw each other twice this season recently, both of them winning on the road. Hard to pick against Bill Belichick, but the Bills have a lot going for them as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's you want to go. I mean, this was one of the upsets I typically pick because I usually pick Belichick in a lot of these situations. Belichick's got a record 31 playoff victories, but his quarterback is making his playoff debut. He's been fantastic. He didn't really contribute to their win. These two teams split during the season, and the one that was in Buffalo was when the Patriots had 222 yards rushing, only threw the ball 3 times. And then whenever in that second meeting when Mac Jones was asked to participate in this against the Bills, that defense, had its way with him. I like the Bills at home. I would not be surprised if Belichick works his magic and they find a way to do this. But I think that Bills defense and the Patriots defense is 2. Bills defense is 1 in points allowed. But I like the Bills at home. I like Josh Allen against Belichick's defense is more than I do Mac Jones against Buffalo's putting together on defense now.
Sunday's games, the Eagles at Buccaneers and Steelers at Kansas City. Both of those are pretty big spreads, and you like Tampa Bay pretty easily against Philly, but you've got a closer score on the Pittsburgh Kansas City game than I might have imagined. Yeah,
I just feel I don't know if obviously Roethlisberger has all that experience, 2 Super Bowls. It's his last game probably. It's his last season for sure. I mean, you don't go through those last 2 games the way he did and have there be any doubt. But I just feel like it's a loose team. And also the other thing with the Steelers, I mean, I didn't vote for him for Coach of the Year, but you could make a case for Mike Tomlin and how he got this team into the playoffs. Yeah, I think he had a quote. Tomlin's great with quotes. It was like, "We're a broken down team" or something like that, and they just kind of did it. And I have a feeling that I know they got blown out when they played them there. It was whatever it was.
I think it was 36-10. I think
36-10. But I just feel like the Steelers. Kansas City's going to win because Kansas City, when they were 3-4, they won 9 of 10. Patrick Mahomes became Patrick Mahomes again. Steve Spagnuolo's defense turned it around unlike anything we've seen. Except for the Bengals game where they kind of played the old style Chiefs defense. But I think they're going to win. But I just feel like the Steelers and Roethlisberger are not going to go out in a blowout. I think they're going to go out. They're going to be put down fighting. Let's put it that way.
The better game that day is San Francisco at Dallas. You like San Francisco? I kind of do too. It's an upset because San Francisco, a 3-point underdog. It does feel like Dallas is one of those teams that's a little bit ripe for an upset, even if they do have that high-powered offense.
And this is, to me, if this is an upset, if I'm in Green Bay, I'm happy because to me, the 2 teams that are going to beat Green Bay, obviously Tampa Bay, and I think Dallas. Dallas, if they get some momentum in that first round, if they were to meet wherever they would meet the Packers, I feel like Dallas would be the team. They get the offense rolling, and that defense can do so much. And they got they got great pass rushers. They got guys that take the ball away. So if I'm Green Bay, I'm hoping for this upset. But I think that the 49ers, with their running game, the fact that they're healthy, the fact that they got a pass rush with Nick Bosa, you know, this is a bad team to play. I think if you're like one of these favorites and you're at home and it's Jerry World and you're assuming, you know, we're going to, although the point spread isn't that's wide, but I would assume that everyone in Dallas is like, we just get through them and then on to the next one. This is a game where you could really stub your toe and get beat by a bunch of bad matchups. And like when the Vikings lost to them, you know, remember Zimmer coming out and complaining about that, you know, holding and all this stuff. Well, it was just a physical game that the Vikings could not match up. And that's the kind of fight that you get into when the 49ers are healthy and rolling.
Yeah, I think they're pretty good right now, and they could be a sneaky team to win one, if not a couple, but we'll see how that works out for them. Last one, and then we'll let you go. Monday's game might be the best of the weekend. Cardinals, Rams. Obviously, Cardinals were red hot to start the year. Then they kind of cooled off. Rams, a little similar story. They hit their rough patch, but then they kind of got going a little more as well. I have a hard time figuring out how this game will go just because both teams have had their share of consistency problems, but you do like the Cardinals to pull this one out.
Yeah, again, I mean, imagine the pressure that is on the Rams right now. What they did, the trade that they made for a guy who at Matthew Stafford's age, all those number one picks, all the things that they've done to push it all in to win this particular Super Bowl at their home stadium, and you know, like the Buccaneers did last year. And granted, he did it with the Lions, but you know the immense pressure that's on Matthew Stafford, the guy who's 0-3 in the playoffs, hasn't played. You know, he's had some stinkers down the stretch here. You know, he's won a couple, including the Vikings. That was a terrible game by him. And then you got the Cardinals. Yeah, again, it's one of those where the momentum stinks because they're 1-4. They're kind of the team with the least amount of momentum coming in. They're the coldest team coming in. So it's another one of those, you know, it could be a flip-flop where, you know, the pressure's on the Rams and you got Kyler Murray. Even in the game that they lost, Kyler Murray had a good game. He did throw the 2 interceptions. But, you know, he's going to be a guy that's going to be really fun to watch in the playoffs, especially whenever he has to do something special against that defense to beat them. So I like Kyler Murray in this game, and I see the Rams not holding up to the pressure.
Some good games for sure. We'll see how they all shake out. You know, Green Bay sitting there kind of waiting for whoever comes next. Same with Tennessee, and so we'll see how those matchups come about next week as well. We'll get you back on to talk about those, and we'll see where the Vikings searches are at that point as well next week, Mark.
All right, thank you.
Like Mark and I talked about, should be a good weekend of games. Looking forward to watching it. It's kind of, you know, some years, you know, I think Vikings fans maybe tune out on the NFL a little bit once the Vikings are eliminated. I'm just kind of looking forward to watching some playoff football this weekend and having some stress-free games where I don't have anything to watch for either personally or professionally. Let's talk a little bit, too, about Andrew Kramer wrote took a look at 5 free agents the Vikings have decisions to make on this offseason. Patrick Peterson, Anthony Barr, Sheldon Richardson, Tyler Conklin, and Xavier Woods. All interesting cases, all big questions, whether they want to stay and what the new regime will think of all of them. I think Sheldon Richardson would be an interesting one to try to keep given the versatility he offered this season. And you know, a guy like Patrick Peterson, if you don't re-sign him, who is going to play corner? Tyler Conklin would be another one that would be nice to see back here in a different role, hopefully when Irv Smith Jr. is healthy. Anthony Barr, got to see them moving on from him, and probably Xavier Woods as well, given that Cam Bynum looks like he can be a player. But that's just my thoughts. We'll see what the new regime has in store for those players, and whether, like I said, whether they want to come back as well. Let's finish with the cooler. Some good Minnesota hockey news. Kirill Kaprizov and Cam Talbot named All-Stars for the Wild. Got to admit, Talbot was a bit of a surprise to me. Goals against average and save percentage more towards the bottom of the league than the top, but good for Kaprizov, good for Talbot. Bigger story, 9 players with Minnesota connections going to play for the U.S. men's Olympic hockey team. And obviously, it was going to be the pros for a long time, but they pulled out not too long ago, and now all of a sudden a bunch of college players, 3 Gophers, some other guys in the state getting a chance to play in the Olympics. Pretty cool for them. Will be a pretty cool story. Don't know if they can rekindle the Miracle on Ice magic, but we will see an amazing opportunity for them nonetheless. So kudos to all 9 of those guys. That will do it for today. That will do it for this week. Back at it next week with a bunch of good stuff. I'm sure some of it will focus on the Vikings and that continued search for a general manager and a head coach, but some other surprises in store for you as well. Have a great weekend. We'll be back at it again on Monday.